In one of the most significant moves against capital punishment, President Joe Biden has commuted the sentence of 37 of the 40 prisoners on federal death row. They will stay in prison for life, but will not be subject to execution. Biden's move is believed to have been driven in part by the incoming Trump administration and an expected hardline policy shift on federal executions. Following all this closely is Robin Marr. She's the executive director of the nonpartisan Death Penalty Information Center. Robin Marr, so nice to have you here.
It's great to be here.
This is a pretty significant move. I mean, one of the most significant by a president with regards to federal death row inmates. What do these commutations mean for death penalty cases overall?
Well, you're right. This is an historic decision. This is the largest mass clemency grant of death-sentenced people by any U.S. president since Lincoln, and the first in the modern death penalty era. You know, there are 40 people on death row. 37 of them now will receive new sentences of life without the possibility of parole. And of course, there are about 2,100 people on state death rows throughout the country whose death sentences will not be affected by this decision. But, you know, part of the motivation for President Biden today was recognizing the racial bias and the unfairness in some of these federal death sentences. And many of those criticisms ring true for the men and women on state death rows as well.
Who are those 37? Broadly speaking, I know it's a big group, but roughly speaking, who are those people whose sentences were commuted today?
Yeah, all of the men who will benefit from President Biden's decision today were sentenced to death decades ago, really in a very different era in our nation's history. This was a time of overzealous prosecutions and very harsh criminal justice penalties and policies that sent dozens of people to federal death rows for crimes they would not be federally prosecuted for today. So a very, very different time. And, you know, the Department of Justice has recently looked at these policies and made some real changes to its prosecution policies, but none of those changes benefited the men on the federal death row. So that's why President Biden needed to make the decision he made today.
As I said, it's almost all, 37 of 40. That leaves 3 behind. Who are those 3 that did not get their sentences commuted?
Yeah, the 3 that did not get sentencing relief today were convicted of federal hate crimes or terrorism offenses. And they include Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who was convicted of the Boston Marathon bombing, Dylann Roof, who was convicted of the hate crime of shooting in the Charleston church many years ago, and most recently Robert Bowers, who was convicted of targeting people at a Pittsburgh synagogue. All 3 of those men were convicted of crimes within the last 10 years. All 3 of them will remain on death row. The remaining 37 men will never be released from federal prison, but they will not be executed.
As you well know, President Biden has a very complicated history with the criminal justice system. He was principally responsible for the infamous crime bill back in the 1990s that many critics have said led to mass incarceration. He wanted to do more on the death penalty during his administration, but was not able to until today. Today he said this. I just want to read a quote that he said. "I am more convinced than ever that we must stop the use of the death penalty at the federal level. In good conscience, I cannot stand back and let a new administration resume executions that I halted." Is that your sense that that's principally what's driving this?
Yeah, well, President Biden was once a very strong supporter of the death penalty, but his change of heart about this really began several years ago during the 2020 presidential campaign. You'll remember at that time, we had just come out of this breathtaking execution spree where President Trump executed 12 men and one woman in just 6 months' time. So we were still reeling from that event, and I think he recognized at that point that the federal death penalty deserved his closer examination. I think he's looked at his conscience. I think he's looked at his own faith, and he most especially listened to the calls of many thousands of people who were asking him to make that decision, most important of which were victims' family members, some of whom had lost loved ones to the men on the federal death row, crimes they committed, which was really incredibly powerful.
I know we can't predict what a future president would do, but is it your sense that when President Trump returns to the White House, that he would take up federal executions? Meaning, does it make sense in some way that Biden took this step today?
Well, I think some of what motivated President Biden was the urgency of this moment and the danger that those men were in. President Trump has promised to use the federal death penalty, to expand its use, and to resume federal executions. But what I hope is that this President Trump will not just simply repeat the mistakes of the past. You know, as President Biden has shown us today, we can all learn from our mistakes and make better decisions in the future, and that's what I'm hoping for.
All right, Robin Marr of the Death Penalty Information Center, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.